Aikwe, Niknamalita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my September 2021 wrap-up. So it is September 30th, which is the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. I believe this is for Canada, but a lot of us are starting to get into it here, I feel like, in the US as well, as this is a day known as Orange Shirt Day. I don't have any orange shirts, so I have this orange scarf that has really pretty native designs on it. It's a Canadian holiday that is a national day of remembrance for victims of the Canadian Indian residential schools systems. I feel personally that we're starting to recognize it a bit more here in the US as well, just because residential schools didn't stop at the Canadian border. The United States had them too. This is not ancient history. Boarding schools ran, and I think the last one closed in the 90s, so I will have more information linked for that down in my Raise Awareness links, so please check those out. Otherwise, let's get on to my books for September. September kind of like came and went in the blink of an eye. I feel like I kept looking at the calendar thinking it was still the beginning of September, and now suddenly it's the end. So for my books, if you haven't watched it yet, I'll link my September TBR up in the cards, as well as down in my description if you want to check that out, mostly because I kind of forgot not that I forgot my TBR, I tend to have those separated, but I forgot what my prompts were, so yeah, I may have to like rewatch that just to. Otherwise, in terms of my stats, I read 8 books for the month of September, which is more than I thought I did, but still not like as much as I want to, but I feel like that's like, I feel like the result, common reaction for me every month. So my pages read was 2,595. Yeah, not like 8 books is bad or anything. I just didn't read as much as my TBR as I really wanted to. But genres, I had 1 science fiction, 2 nonfictions, 1 horror, 1 romance, and 3 fantasy. In terms of audiences, 6 YA, 1 children, and 6 adult, 1 YA, 1 children's book. This is pretty typical for me this year, but 6 were audiobooks and 2 were physical. Of those 6 audiobooks, 4 of them came from Libro FM, 2 were from my library, and then for the physical books, 1 was from a publisher and the other was also from my library. So utilizing that library. So for September, I participated in Buzzwordathon, Bookoplathon, and the Magical Readathon. I did not end up putting a TBR up for the Magical Readathon because I didn't notice it until after I already put up my September TBR and didn't feel like redoing it, though I did end up recording another one for the Magical Readathon. I alternately scrapped it because I thought I could just easily wrap it up here. So I did not do very well for the Bookoplathon, my Bookoplathon TBR. I feel like I could easily replace prompts, but like I said, I kind of forgot what they were. I had it all written down and I cleared off my desk recently and threw it away. But I'll have all the hosts, the links, and everything down in the description down below if you want to check those out. Now for the books I read, let's just go ahead and get into them. So the first book I read for September was Goallock by Laura Lamb. This is a science fiction, climate fiction book that is set in a not too distant future and in an alternate universe. I only know that because I looked up a question on Goodreads. Didn't even look it up. I happened to see a question in the reviews. asking if this was like based on current statuses, and so it's alternate because apparently some of the things are what they are. So basically, some of the politics are very unfortunately reminiscent of what is going on currently. Someone became president that doesn't really want women in the workplace. The government now offers stipends to women who get pregnant in order for them to stay home for 5 years. However, there's also a tax, child tax, that if you have more than one child, then you have to pay for that. There's also like food insecurities and climate refugees due to the changing climate change. Bigger cities, particularly in California, require pollution masks. Yeah, it's all very intense. And basically we are following Naomi, who is a botanist, but is also really wants to be an astronaut. So we are following her perspective. We get a bit of her past as well as the current. And the current is that her guardian, Valerie Black, is spearheading a first all-female mission to a planet in the Goallock zone. And basically this planet is very reminiscent of Earth and is essentially pitched as Plan B. Valerie and this all-female crew go on this space mission to basically see if this planet is able to hold life, and their plan is to send a message back to Earth going, okay, yes, come on, let's do this. Things go awry. This whole book is essentially that constantly asking the question, would you kill one to save five type of deal. It was constantly doing that of like moral after moral dilemma. So it was really interesting. But at the same time, I don't know, there were issues with it that I had that I can't necessarily say here without spoiling it. My main issue is that it tried to be diverse, but it was like almost too subtle. So there's this aspect of diversity within books that I enjoy, where someone is casually a different ethnicity, a different race, and it's very prevalent. It's just prevalent. It's just there. That happens to be them. It didn't gain them anything. It's like not giving them superpowers or anything. It's just there. And that's what I tend to like. It's just kind of like everyone is, like the fact that they're in the room is great, and the fact that they are characters is great. But there's like, there was like, I assumed that all the female astronauts on this mission were white, and it wasn't until about like 3/4 of the book that it was mentioned that one of these astronauts is black. Like I knew right away that one of them was Russian because she had a Russian accent, and she was was it an expat? Immigrated from Russia. So, but it was just kind of weird. It wasn't as great as I had wanted to be. There is a female-female relationship in here that I appreciated, and like at one point was like really just nervous about. Not because, just because it ended up like, there were, like I said, moral dilemma after moral dilemma, and sometimes not all these characters met eye to eye. So it was very kind of strenuous like that. And at one point I remember like having to pause the audiobook and just read the rest because it was too intense and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So yeah, but I gave this 3 stars. I gave this 4 stars. I'm thinking I'm going to down it to a 3. Because the other one was the main romance in here. This was not the female-female romance. It's just the main romance between Naomi and someone else. I didn't particularly like it. I get the idea that the explanation that they put behind it, but at the same time it still was just like, it still ain't quite, So that's my own personal opinion, and even that itself felt like a moral dilemma. So yeah, it was an interesting book. I have been wanting to read it for a while, so I'm glad I was finally able to get to it. So, and of course it did have, I don't know, I also really particularly like the ending of it being a little uplifting in terms of, because I feel like climate, I haven't read too much climate fiction, but when it comes to climate talk or climate change talk, it can be fairly negative of we have to do this soon because negative impact, humanity doom. And this one in particular, there was an uplifting kind of like, there was that we somehow are able to solve it, that we can live in peace and everything can be okay. So that was a nice change of pace when it comes to climate talk. So next I read, and had to read because I wanted to know. I actually had seen this on Jessie from Bowties and Books' channel, and they had raved about this book, so I immediately wanted to pick it up. It is a book of the month book. I did not get it for that particular month and should have. I regret not doing that, but I got it now, and actually was I able to get it? I think I was able to get it through Libro FM. So also listen to this. But that is The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. This one follows a particular family, the Montoyas, who are used to life without explanations. We follow several of family members and we kind of get this sense of what the Montoyas are about. So the matriarch of the family, Orquídea Divina, sends out these letters saying that she is going to come to her house to collect their inheritance. And when they get there, her house is completely covered in vines that fight back, essentially, if you try to meet them with violence. No one can quite figure out how to get into the house. So all at the front porch is a bunch of Montoyas who are already kind of bickering with each other until until one of them is finally able to get in by asking permission. And when they go in, Orquídea Divina has roots of a tree for legs, and has leaves and branches sprouting from her arms. So it's this very magical book, and Orquídea Divina has a mysterious past that none of her family knows about, and some of them are getting really frustrated of like, why don't you just answer these questions? And so a couple of her family members decide to figure it out, and they travel to do so. So we kind of follow them on this adventure. I ultimately really like this. Orquídea is such a badass. I absolutely loved her. I love some of the other characters in here as well. I just wish we kind of got more of the family. We do get dual perspective in terms of we get multiple perspectives of different family members, but it switches back from present day trying to figure this out to past and trying to figure out Orquídea's history, because she's never talked about it, and this is what her family's trying to figure out. So it was really fun. It was also dark, and it had some heavier topics, content warning for death of a loved one, drowning, death of a child, and an abusive relationship. So just be wary going into that. But ultimately, I thought this was really just very almost like poetic in a way. It was very vibrant and fun, and had darker elements to it, but magical elements to it. So it was really, I liked it. I rated this 4 stars. It will stay at 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. And then this one also was not in my Bookoplathon TBR, but I did manage to fit it in for the magical readathon for which one was it? For Ruin of the Sky, which is read a book featuring ghosts or a haunted house, and at one point ghosts do show up in this book. So next I read My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, and in fact this is one of the reasons why I feel like I didn't read that many physical books. I have been reading this since August, and it took me a little bit to get into. I have a full review up currently, and we'll have that linked above and down below as well. This one is Stephen Graham Jones's newest release. It released at the end of August, and it follows Jade Daniels, who is the horror chick in her small town, specifically slashers. And her small town is being gentrified across Indian Lake. Mansions are being built and yachts are taking over the lake. And Jade Daniels, with her encyclopedic knowledge of slasher films, is noticing some details within her small town that a slasher may be among them. So she feels it's up to her to prepare the final girl, who she believes is the final girl, for essentially her end battle with the slasher in order to defeat them. Though Jade feels conflicted because she is constantly daydreaming about the perfect slasher film, or perfect slasher to come through her small town, because it's really Jade against everyone else. She's not understood. She is Native American, but that, like, she's only connected through that with her abusive father, and it doesn't like help her at all. So she is casually Native, which I appreciated. So yeah, I didn't quite enjoy this. Again, I'll leave my full review down in the description down below. It ultimately took me a little bit. There is content warnings. This is a horror. It is a horror, so bear in mind content warnings for graphic depictions of blood, gore, decomposition, death of an animal, suicide. There is a suicide attempt, and detail mentions and sexual abuse. Yeah, so yes, bear that in mind. This also wasn't a part of any readathon to begin with, but I did manage to fit it in with the magical readathon for Obsidian Falls, which was to read a thriller / mystery. This is more horror but has a thriller aspect to it, so that's how I'm counting it. Next, I listened to Dark Archives, a librarian's investigation into the science and history of books bound in human skin by Megan Rosenblum. This was a book that was recommended through the podcast My Favorite Murder, which is a true crime podcast hosted by Georgia Hartstock and Karen Calgariff. I actually haven't listened to them in a while. This was, I think, actually suggested like last year or something. It was put on my radar, and was happy to get it. I also have a full review of this coming out here shortly, so be aware of that. Look for that coming here soon. But ultimately, really enjoyed this. It went into topics that I didn't expect from this. It is kind of a morbid topic of books bound in human skin, but it's so much deeper than that, I feel like. Megan Rosenblum is a medical librarian, of which I was very interested in, of just like how, like, that's really cool. So that in itself was really cool, but she also goes into some, like, histories of like the medical gaze, and as well as like true crime, etc. It's really interesting. Tanneries, so content warning, just because of the morbid topic, that there is graphic depictions of death and injury, as well as there is some description of tanneries, so if you're sensitive to that at all, and murder. So yeah, this one fit for Buzzwordathon because the buzzword for September was dark, and then it also fit in for The Mist of Solitude, which is a standalone. So yes, sorry, I can't remember anything of what I did for. I can't quite remember if that was part of. Yeah, it was. This was part of a prompt for Bookoplathon. What was it for? I think, oh, it was the and that those buzzwords, so that had it in the subtitle, so that's what I used it for. Next book was also an audiobook, and I don't think it was a part of any TBR. Like I couldn't fit into any challenges. But this is The Shark Club by Ann Kidd Taylor, and this is a contemporary romance. We are following Maeve Donnelly, who is a marine biologist. Her her particular area of interest is sharks, and this was caused due to being bitten by a shark when she was 12. During that incident, is when she first kissed Daniel, the boy of her dreams. But now that she is 30, I guess 18 years later, Maeve has thrown herself into her work and is coming back to Florida from Bimini, and where she lives in a hotel with her, I believe it's her grandmother and her twin brother. Her grandmother runs the hotel and took them in after a tragic accident with her when their parents died. While Maeve is fearless in the water, on land she is indecisive. So when a chance encounter with a little girl makes her think if she should give Daniel another chance or for her to move on with the stingray biologist marine biologist that she met in Bimini, she has a hard time trying to figure out what to do. So this one I actually liked, not enough to buy a physical copy. But the cover definitely interested me, and I was definitely really debating it through half the book. I appreciated one, just how much of like the shark activism was in this book. I really appreciated, but otherwise, when it came to the romances, I had some concerns. There was, of course, the lack of communication that I didn't like, and then things started to repeat after we learned a bit of the history between Maeve and Daniel, and it was never really talked about, and that bugged me. So romances are usually hit or miss, aren't usually there for me, just because I think I want specific things from them that typical romance tropes don't typically lend to. What I also appreciated was just Maeve's relationship with this little girl. In this book, it really made me just miss my niece and realize that I hadn't seen her in a bit. So, of course, like, I made plans with her. I really appreciated that. So it was a really cute element that I hadn't seen before in romance books. Not that I read a whole lot of them, but that one in particular I really liked. But I'm finding that I definitely enjoy books that have like research elements to it, despite not a scientist. I just really appreciate it. I think it's really cool. So that one I gave 3 stars. No, I actually gave it 4 stars. So yeah, I'm gonna say 3 stars. Just because I feel like there were some elements that really needed to be talked more through. The same with her brother. So, and that was one thing too, that there was like a dramatic thing that ended up happening with her brother as well. And it's like, I understood her reaction, and she did eventually talk to him about it, but like couldn't do the same for her love interest. So it was just like, what? I also felt like the ending was fairly wrapped up really quickly, and I think it could have been extended out a bit more. Next was a reread, and that is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is my little pocket version, pocket edition, but I did listen to this, and which was really cool just because I remember reading this for the first time, and I often like skipped or skimmed the songs, or yeah, but for the audiobook it was really cool because it was narrated by Andy Sakaris. I think that's the guy who plays Gollum in the movies, narrated the book. Which I didn't know until Gollum came into play, and I'm like, oh dang, this guy does a good Gollum. Is this full cast? and looked at it and was like, no, just this Andy guy's playing, just this Andy guy's narrating. And it wasn't until I talked to my brother that he's like, oh yeah, that's Gollum. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I was gonna say, because Ian McKellen does not sound like Gandalf in here. So I know it would like be a lot for them to do a full cast version, but they should do a full cast version. But yeah, so I reread this. I've read this before. It was really fun for the audiobook. Andy does a fantastic job narrating. I think originally I gave this 5 stars. I'm giving this a 4.5 star because after reading it the second time, there is some fat phobia going on in here. There is a particular dwarf, I believe his name is Bombus. I believe, I'm not entirely sure. But he is constantly being told that he is fat and that if he didn't want to do certain things, then he should lose weight, or just one way or another, they were commenting on his weight, which I found really kind of annoying and got old really quick. But other than that, I really like this. I remember why I dislike the thought of a trilogy coming out for the movies, for the adaptations, because in the book, some of the elements or some of the events that the movies had didn't really seem like that big of a deal. So the fact that they split this little book into 3 movies seems really outlandish. Of course, I love the movies now that I've watched them. I was like protesting them for a little bit there, but I have watched them and I absolutely love them. And in fact, when I was listening to this, all I wanted to do was listen to the soundtrack when I wasn't able to listen to the book, whether I was at work or if other people were in the room. So I just put on the Hobbit soundtrack. Also, Andy Sequeira doing the songs in here, fantastic. This one is the second fantasy that I read, but also it's a classic. This is considered a children's book. I guess I didn't really talk about the most people know what the Hobbit is, but if you don't, this follows Bilbo Baggins. This is the prequel for the Lord of the Rings series. I guess it's like a book that was split into 3, but this is the prequel. This is considered a classic children's book. But we follow Bilbo Baggins as he is kind of just recruited by Gandalf to go on this mission with 13 dwarves to go get their mountain back from a dragon. Along the way, shenanigans ensue. Ultimately, really fun. Still enjoy it. Just marked down half a star because of the fat phobia. And that, yeah, I get it that it could have been because of the times as well, but it doesn't mean I have to enjoy it. So, it's not on my Bookoplathon TBR, but I did manage to put it in for the magical readathon for the Nova's Path entrance, which was to read a book with a map. And this one has a map. So, next book I read was on, yes, finally got to this, was determined to finish it this month, and that is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This one has been a pain. Not that it was the book's fault. So I had started this book last summer, and got, what, like 18% into it, and then put it down because I prioritized other books. And then I restarted it again this summer, and got 16% of the way through, and then prioritized other books. So I was determined in September to finish this book. This was for the prompt in Bookoplathon for, it was another buzzwordathon landing, and I think it was like titles, so like king, queen. I used god, goddess. Don't know if it's necessarily a title, but I went with it. So I ended up actually listening to this. I ended up just buying the audiobook because I was determined to just finish this. And I'm not sure if that was the best idea. This one we follow Cassiopeia Tun, who it's the Jazz Age in Mexico, and Cassiopeia is working as essentially a servant in her grandfather's house. They don't necessarily really consider her part of the family because she's her mother had ran off with an Indian, had to come back with Cassiopeia, and her family hasn't like really accepted it. One day when her family is out and Cassiopeia is cleaning her grandfather's room, she ends up stumbling across a chest, and when she opens it, she gets a sliver of bone stuck in her hand and essentially releases the god of death. I can't remember his name. And is roped into helping him find his other body parts because his twin brother, who was the one who betrayed him, hid his eye, his finger, and his ear in various places in Mexico and California so that his brother wouldn't get his full power if he was ever released. So Cassiopeia has to help him, because if she doesn't, her life forces will be like extinguished essentially every time. Because of that bone shard in her hand, the god of death is essentially sucking the life out of her. That is how he is living. So it was really interesting. I really liked the atmosphere of the book. The descriptions of these different towns and cities of Mexico and California were really fun, particularly as the Jazz Age was in full swing. So it was really cool to like see that aspect. So this is like a fantasy historical fiction. That part was great. Even the descriptions of the characters' emotions were really good. Like a lot of what Cassiopeia felt, like I understood and like I felt it with her. However, I did not connect with any of the characters. I had a hard time connecting with any of them. And I can't say whether or not it was because of the narration or because of how it was written. I feel like it was because of how it was written. Cassiopeia was not necessarily the greatest character in terms of she was very stubborn. She's very argumentative. I understand that for the most part she's standing up for what she believes in and she's standing up for herself. But at times I just kind of found her arguing for the sake of arguing, and I don't necessarily know if I really wanted Martine's perspective, which is her cousin, who feels like Cassiopeia like did him dirty from the beginning. Yeah, I don't know. I liked the ultimate lesson in this book, but didn't necessarily like any of the characters. I do hope to read more of Silvia Moreno Garcia in the future. This one, I feel like, so I already said about the Bookoplathon. However, I feel like it could also work too for the magical Readathon. So for figuring out like not the Traveler's Key, but the what your character is. There is a heritage prompt, and basically there is several prompts that you can choose from. However, I want to be mixed heritage. I want to be elf and water earthling. So for the elf portion is to read a book with moon or stars on the cover title, and up here is stars. And it's very much, Cassiopeia talks about the constellations in the book. Not that that's needed, but yeah, so I feel like that covers that one pretty well. So, and I also want to do in Earthling, which is to read a book with an element in the title, which if you've seen my October TBR, you'll know that I am attempting. If it doesn't quite work though, I have some plans for it in November. And then finally, my last book is my last nonfiction, and that is Floriography, an illustrated guide to Victorian language of flowers by Jessica Rue. This is a library book. It's actually an interlibrary loan, which I was super excited about. It's my first one. So that's what I do for my job. I help out with interlibrary loans. So because our main collection is closed off to students and faculty and staff because it's under construction right now, we are heavily relying on interlibrary loan for our physical books. This one is from our Arboretum Library in Arcadia, California. So thank you so much to them. don't worry, I'll put the slip back on it. All the books that come in from interlibrary loan have like book slips that go on it. I just am doing this for the aesthetic. It'll be put back on. But yeah, this is a nonfiction and has beautiful illustrations talking and basically talks about the meanings and origins of like the language of plants, essentially, which I really like. Also, this book smells really good. Fabulous illustrations, and it talks about like where the origins of the meanings came from, as well as like what to pair them with. I mean, it's pretty simple and straightforward. My only and this has nothing to do with the author, my criticism is like picturing some of these flowers together doesn't seem right to me, especially once, like, it's one thing to like look at them in here and like think about pairing them up at like as an in terms of thinking of them as illustrations. The scale size is about all the same, but when thinking about the actual scale size of these plants and thinking about pairing them together, some of them seem really kind of goofy to me. But otherwise, I think it's really interesting, and I almost wish that there was more of the origin history of these meanings. I get that some of them like are just old, and I get that it's just talking about the Victorian language, but some of these we still use today. So like using holly and mistletoe during the holidays, or like lilies for weddings, or even dahlias. So a lot of that is really, it's interesting to know that like we're still using that, and that's where like some of the traditions came from. It's also interesting to like some of the meanings of like basil meaning hate, and it's just like, I'm sorry, I love basil, I would love to receive basil. And so the fact that like, you know, this feels like very passive aggressive gifts before text was invented. Yeah, so because like you can pair like basil and like belladonna together, like that was like real bad. So I don't know, and it's just the fact like did everyone know these meanings, like and like I remember too, like for some reason as I was reading this book, what came to mind was The Wedding Planner with Jennifer Lopez and Matthew McConaughey, when she's taking him through flowers and having him pick out flowers for his wedding, and he's like, how about bleeding these ones? And she's like, those are bleeding hearts, those are for funerals. But like she's kind of naming like some of the meanings to them, and it's just like, do people still do this? Do they still understand the meaning and language of flowers? So it's fairly interesting in a way, and I like the idea, but at the same time it's just like, yeah, I don't know, it's just interesting. So it was a fun little read. That's one thing I'm finding when it's a little slow at work, is that finding things that are on my Goodreads TBR and seeing what's available through interlibrary loan is kind of dangerous, but fun. So yeah, this is what I read for September. If you have read any of these, please let me know what your thoughts were down in the description down below. I would love to hear it. Please no spoilers if you can help it. Otherwise, yeah, I hope that you check out my Raise Awareness links. Hopefully that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Cheers.